In 2020, it's rather difficult to have more than a 2-minute conversation and not talk about face masks. It's being discussed in our politics, it's being discussed in our schools, in our workplaces, even in our own homes. So it's not surprising that we would get questions about exercising with a face mask. What are the risks? For potential problems, what are the warning signs? And most importantly, how can you avoid them and still stay active? We're diving headfirst into the whole mask question today on the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast.
Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
When this whole pandemic started, we were actually doing online training. We'd been doing online personal training since about 2012. And what was interesting about that was when the pandemic set in, we had to quickly pivot. I like that word. I'm not a big fan of the whole new normal phrase, but I like the word pivot because the businesses that actually pivoted during this time, most of them survived and survived quite well. We were blessed enough that we had actually already developed a successful formula for doing online training. Now, we were only doing a handful of online training sessions prior to the pandemic. But once we saw back in March that our facilities were going to be shut down, social distancing was going to have to be put in place, we realized that we were looking at a major pivot. Now, obviously, we wanted to keep our clients in shape. One of the things that was not talked about as much early on in the safety precautions or the health concerns with the pandemic was keeping up your fitness. I mean, it was discussed some, but it wasn't top of the list. But even the National Institute of Health recommended that everybody continue to stay fit. And why? Because that maintains your immune system. And so if you were to contract COVID, you would have a better chance of fighting it off if, of course, you had a healthy immune system. And one of the best ways to do that is, of course, to continue working out. Well, we wanted our clients to stay working out. And since we had a lot of practice with doing online training and with the qualified staff that we have, doing online training with virtually no equipment, or with the majority of our clients, no equipment whatsoever, we were able to pivot our business and have our clients go online. So quickly, we went from a handful of personal training sessions one week to 240 sessions online the next week. And the reason I bring this up in talking about the whole mask discussion is that that's kind of what's going on with the research on wearing a mask and exercising. Now, stay with me here. Going from, say, 10 to 12 online personal training sessions a week to 240 and eventually 270 and then finally 300 before we open back up, we learned a lot. I mean, that was some intense research. We were not only conducting the sessions, but our directors were meeting on a weekly basis, twice a week, and discussing exactly what was going on and how we can make it better. But in that rather intense period, we got extremely good at doing online training. And now 30% of our business is online, and I'm sure it will continue. We have clients that actually prefer it. And that was all because we had this intense study of going of 270 all the way up to 300 sessions of online personal training, how we can conduct it. If nobody wanted to use equipment, how we can make the workouts exciting, how we can vary them enough to where they weren't boring, and also how we could reach the client and do this safely and effectively and make it intense enough to get gains out of it. We were able to decipher those things in a rather short amount of time. With the whole exercising with the mask, we are learning an incredible amount. Now, the reason I bring up the online training and the comparison here is that the volume of exercisers nationwide, worldwide for that matter, that were exercising with a mask were a small percentage of folks that were getting into the resistance breathing apparatus that are really hot. They've kind of probably seen somewhat of a resurgence with the whole COVID situation, whole pandemic situation, but they'd actually started to kind of fizzle a bit following the trend of a typical fad, and therefore it was kind of burning out prior to COVID. And I think COVID may have even brought it back, but there was actually some research that had come out about the resistance breathing and finding out that it really wasn't benefiting you strongly. And that's a podcast for another time. But it was a small number of people that were actually doing that. So it would take longer to get results because you have a small number of people that are doing it. Therefore, the sample of exercisers using masks was very small. And all of a sudden, when gyms started opening back up and large chains were requiring individuals to exercise with a mask on, and as well as states were requiring people to wear masks at all time, all of a sudden now our sample population just went through the roof. And so we've got quite a bit of data now coming out about this. And even the Mayo Clinic, National Institute of Health, several, the University of Maryland, are just some of the studies that I've reviewed on this. And these were hypotheses that were put together and some small group studies that they've already conducted and they have results on. They actually started a few months ago and they've gotten some feedback from it already, mainly because, and I say small group, but excuse me, I actually mean larger populations that they're gathering information from. So I didn't mean to say small group. But before we dive into those studies, let's talk about why are we even concerned with this? I mean, why are we concerned with a mask being on your face while you're exercising? Now, you would think that would be very obvious, but remember, I'm the guy who, when I was a kid, riding in the carpool with Miss Johnson would tell us a fact. I would always raise my hand and ask why. I wanted to know why. I wanted to know the answer. Why is that happening? Why is what's going on? The reasons behind it. And of course, the simple answer is, of course, well, you've got to breathe and you have trouble breathing. Well, why is that so important? And if you're laughing at me when you're hearing this, think about this. If you go to lift an extremely heavy object, let's say you're doing a bench press. Let's say you're picking anything up, picking up a bag of dog food. But particularly in exercising, how many times you actually hold your breath when you lift something? Now, most of us know that you shouldn't do that, and that's true, you shouldn't, but why? Why is restricted breathing a challenge? Well, real quick on that holding your breath during exercises, obviously holding your breath, cutting off oxygen completely has some very obvious ramifications. And that maneuver of actually holding your breath when you lift something heavy actually has a name to it. It's called the Valsalva maneuver. What's happening there is that your body is, as I've said many times, is the smartest machine that you'll ever encounter. And your body knows that, hey, Joe, you're obviously lifting something incredibly heavy. And your body's talking to you and saying, Joe, we believe that you're not foolish enough to continue doing this. So this must be a brief challenge that we need to get through. So I'll tell you what we're going to do, Joe, and this is your body talking to you. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to grab some energy that we usually reserve only for breathing. And we know it takes a lot of energy to expand the lungs and collapse the lungs. A lot of that is controlled by the serratus muscle, which is an extremely strong muscle. If you don't know how to train it, give us a call. Love to walk you through some serratus exercise. It's also the muscle that controls posture. But that's an extremely strong muscle. It takes a lot of energy to expand and collapse the lungs in order to do breathing. So your body says, okay, we're going to stop that. We're going to stop that, and we're going to conserve this energy and use it only to get through this brief task, very brief, just a couple of seconds, that Joe's going to need this extra energy. Well, the problem is that we tend to lift and exhale and then hold our breath and lift, exhale, hold our breath, and keep doing that because we're not, some people would argue we're not smart enough to stop the resistance. Or actually, we just don't breathe through the exercise. It's something that our trainers constantly have to tell a client, remember to breathe, or breathe, and actually breathe with them, in, out, in on the negative, out on the positive, or in on the eccentric contraction, out on the concentric contraction. And the reason being is that I'm fighting, or my trainer is fighting your body's natural ability to shut off that oxygen. By shutting off that oxygen for a prolonged period of time, if you're continuing to lift and do heavy lifts, I use bench press as an example because a lot of people are usually trying to set goals with that. But squats or lat pull down, or it doesn't matter what, even do an abdominal exercise, what can happen is, one thing, you can cause a stroke. You can actually cause problems in your brain and cause a stroke. Another thing can happen, of course, you can pass out. It's not really that funny when you pass out and a weight lands on top of you. Of course, incredibly dangerous. The other thing that happens, and this kind of speaks to the whole mask debate, is restricted oxygen flow to the body restricts oxygen to the entire body. Now, it seems very obvious, but most people don't think about that. It restricts oxygen not only to your cardiopulmonary system, but it restricts oxygen to the muscle. And your muscles need oxygen in order to grow. Because of this resistance of oxygen, or reduced amount of oxygen flow to the body and to the muscles, is the whole reason for me doing this podcast, and why I think that we need to be careful when it comes to exercising with a mask. Now, I want to go ahead and put my disclaimer in here and say, look, I'm not telling anybody to, one, go against the rules of your state or your local government, two, go against the rules of your gym, and three, I'm not a physician, nor do I play one on TV. If your doctor's told you to always wear a mask, by all means, their advice in this situation does trump mine. So I'm not telling you don't wear a mask. I want you to know the risks that are associated with it and how we can mitigate those risks, how we can continue to exercise even through this pandemic and even through a mask ordinance. The reason I throw a disclaimer in now is because I'm going to tell you some of the risks associated with exercising with a mask. And I'm going to actually give you some information from the Mayo Clinic, though I really don't have to go to the Mayo Clinic. Being an exercise physiologist, any exercise physiologist is going to know that you restrict breathing, you're causing problems. They're going to know this information. But it is actually covered by Mayo Clinic. University of Maryland has done some studies on this. National Institute of Health has even made some recommendations. And one of the warnings about it is exercising with decreased oxygen is just like it would have the same physiological effects of exercising with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or what is known as COPD. Patients with COPD, when they're exercising, typically experience dizziness, drowsiness, fatigue, because, of course, oxygen equals energy. You reduce your amount of oxygen, you're going to lower your amount of energy. They've seen this in coal miners working in caves. When they get down to certain levels, they monitor how much oxygen they have. And the old way they used to do it is realizing how tired they got, because lower amounts of oxygen, of course, lower amounts of energy. Headaches, muscular weakness, and that goes to what I was talking about earlier, the fact that your muscles need oxygen in order to function effectively. And overall discomfort, which lack of water and lack of oxygen is going to cause that. How long did you think I was going to go before I actually mentioned water in here? But lack of water and lack of oxygen will cause an overall discomfort, because it's two things that your body needs all the time. And of course, the most common effect, common symptom that we see in COPD is shortness of breath. This problem goes to a much deeper level, though. And I'm going to see if I can break this down for you, make it kind of simple. But this is a hypothesis that the National Institute of Health has actually put out in some studies that they are working on currently. And I think it's interesting when they put out an abstract. They'll put out an abstract and they'll have a hypothesis, and they'll thoroughly vet their hypothesis. In other words, they have looked at a situation and they have done their research on, okay, similar situations, or scientifically, what is happening. We know that you've got reduced air intake when you're wearing a mask, so what does that typically cause? And they do a lot of research on that. It's pretty fascinating prior to actually conducting the study. You would think after reading their hypothesis that, and all the work that they go into with their hypothesis, they almost don't need to do the study. But this is pretty obvious. You do understand that you do have a reduced airflow, and we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. And one of the things that people talk about are having a closed loop system. In other words, your mask is covering your face, therefore you don't have an open loop system with, of course, oxygen free flowing into your nose or into your airway, and then carbon dioxide flowing out freely without any kind of obstruction. That would be an open loop system. Closed loop system is when you have wearing the mask. And a lot of people fear that in a closed loop system we would be worried about carbon dioxide poisoning. Well, they've basically decided that's really not true, and I'm sure that further studies will state that if you've got a mask that has breathability, in other words, you're not wearing some kind of rubber mask on your face or airtight mask, then of course you're probably having enough free flow of carbon dioxide that you're not worried about carbon dioxide poisoning. But one thing that you are worried about is the reduced amount of oxygen and increased amount of carbon dioxide. Stay with me here. An increased amount of carbon dioxide raises the acidity in the whole muscle breakdown process, which affects how your body handles lactic acid. Now, lactic acid, let's break that down real quick for you. I've talked about this before. Lactic acid, a lot of people think is what's responsible for the soreness that you have the day after a workout. Actually, lactic acid is a byproduct of tearing of muscle fibers. I've told you before, all we're doing was we're trying to tear muscle fibers so that they'll grow stronger. Well, that burn that you feel when you're either stretching for a long period of time or you are doing resistance training or even cardiovascular training. Anytime you're breaking down muscle tissue, that burn you feel is lactic acid being released when those fibers are torn and actually burning your muscle. What it is, it's a neat little communication to the brain that causes pain, sends communication to the brain, basically says, hey, stop this. And that's what lactic acid does. If you notice, if you stop the activity, that pain, that burning sensation goes away. Well, lactic acid actually dissipates between 25 and 30 seconds after you stop an exercise. You can actually prolong the breakdown of that lactic acid in the body by restricting your oxygen flow and increasing carbon dioxide in the system because it increases your acidity. So there's a good example, or a good hindrance, it's hard for me to say, a good hindrance to muscle development. One of the first parts of restoring the muscle is to get the lactic acid out of there. If you slow down that process, you're going to slow muscle growth. So it seems like very complicated, but actually it's not. I mean, it's rather significant. Then you find yourself, if you're working in a restricted oxygen environment, an increased CO2 environment, then you're almost on a treadmill as far as muscle growth is concerned. You could retard your muscle growth. So therefore, all this effort you're putting in to do everything you can to be safe as possible, you're increasing your chances of not actually growing muscle. So even if you don't get dizzy, even if you don't pass out, even if you do everything that's perfectly correct and don't feel any of these other symptoms, you may be just spinning your wheels as far as muscular development. So this is the reason I wanted to have this podcast and actually talk about this subject. But there are ways to mitigate this, and these aren't just Garrett's ways to do this. Of course, this is the protocol that we use. This is what we are abiding by. But lo and behold, it happens to be what University of Maryland, National Institute of Health, Cooper's Clinic, a few others are recommending that people do. And I'll tell you the precautions that you need to take. Well, first thing, the things that you need to look out for are the items that I said earlier. If you're going to wear a mask and you're exercising, look for the risk factors. Look for the signs of your risk factors. Dizziness, drowsiness, fatigue, developing a headache. That can be from lack of water. And there we go again, putting that water thing in there. Being weak, finding out that, day after day, you're not just having one bad day, you're having several bad days as far as your strength gains are concerned. Not just gains, but you're not able to lift as heavy a weight for as many repetitions. You're seeing a drop back in your workouts, even though you may have been exercising through the entire pandemic, or you've been back at it for a while and you can't seem to get back to those normal gains or those normal weights that you were using. That can be because of what muscle weakness, going to that high acidity situation where your muscle development is being affected. Overall discomfort, obviously, and then, of course, shortness of breath. Those are things that you need to be wary of as far as those are your risk factors for the mask maybe causing problems. But I'm not against a gym making this requirement, obviously. I'm not against a state making this. I'm not going to get into that whole argument. I'm not an epidemiologist, nor do I play one on TV. And I will remind you, by the way, your high school dropout friend that's telling you what you should do, your friend that seems to have read a lot about this, it's telling you what to do, and even your high school music teacher. Remember, they're not epidemiologists, so we want to pay attention to the right scientist on this. But there are precautions you can take to continue to exercise during this time, even if a mask has to be involved or a mask ordinance has to be involved. The first is probably the most obvious one, and that is, don't wear a mask. And that's not what I'm telling you to do. I want you to abide by the rules and what have you, but there are opportunities that still exist for exercising without a mask. And one of the great ways of doing that, of course, is exercising in your own home. Now, this is why we've had such success with online programming. Now, I did a podcast talking about online programming. I'm actually going to talk a little more in depth about that because I don't think, actually, if you have not done it, you really don't know what you're missing. You'd be amazed at what an online program especially online program working with a personal trainer, can do for you. This is why we've had so many people that have actually signed up and are now completely online with us. I mean, we've met them online. They are conducting their workouts online, and they're having incredible success with an online program. That's the first thing I would recommend, doing it at home and looking into working out online. It's safer. You can work out with a mask. Obviously, you're social distancing. Unless you're getting 5 of your friends over in your room, that's not what I'm telling you to do. But that's the first thing, of course, not to have to get in a situation where you don't have to wear the mask altogether. Doing, of course, cardiovascular workouts or even resistance training workouts outside. Now, that's why a majority of fitness enthusiasts have actually done outside training. We have that possibility here at Personal Edge to actually work out outside. We're in a unique environment where we can conduct our sessions while social distancing, not only just outside. We are a personal training facility. So having sheer large numbers in our facility is not the nature of our business. So we're able to social distance. We're able to maintain a safe environment as far as the pandemic's concerned, evidenced by our actually no incidents of COVID-19 in our facility. But putting yourself in a situation outside or away from people without a mask, it is obviously you're going to be safer there as far as your workouts are concerned. But what you really want to know is, how do I exercise safely with a mask? Well, the first thing is it starts with what type of mask. In this situation, the mask is basically there to protect others. Is to keep any of potential spread of COVID-19 coming from you. There is some arguments there, and I don't want to get into this. Again, I'm not an epidemiologist, that you do have some sort of protection in wearing a mask, but it's mostly for protecting other people. So therefore, you want everybody around you wearing a mask also, because of course that's protecting you. But the type of mask is very important. N95 masks, though they may be fantastic, and they are from what I understand, in keeping anybody from spreading coronavirus. They're wonderful. They're not good for exercising. Now, I'm not preaching against the N95 mask, but in an exercising situation, that can increase humidity. It can also increase resistance in breathing, and of course, an overall discomfort in just wearing the mask. Paper masks should be avoided also. They're known to hold in humidity. They get wet themselves or whatever, increasing resistance and basically breaking down. And when they do break down, they're not doing any good either way. The best way to go as far as a mask is concerned in an exercise environment, if you have to wear one, is a cloth mask. One that's washable. And I highly recommend, this has bothered me a bit when I'm seeing folks with just filthy masks, knowing that they've been wearing them for a long time. That's not a good thing. Clean your mask. Definitely clean your mask and have a few of them. But a cloth mask is probably best. And it's being recommended by National Institute of Health even to wear a cloth mask when exercising. Lower resistance of breathing, though it does provide the protection as far as you're exhaling and causing others to be infected. But you have less resistance there and less humidity there, and overall a better experience as far as using the mask. Next thing I would tell you is if you really want to know how you're doing, monitor your heart rate. Monitor your heart rate. If there's so many different devices out there that most people are wearing some sort of heart rate monitor almost at all times and not even using it. But it's something that I would highly recommend. I wear a Garmin watch myself. I know a lot of people that wear Apple watches. There's several different. Polar makes a heart rate monitors. There's way too many to mention. Fitbits and what have you. Use that. Start to use that and start to learn what your numbers are. The first thing you should do is, of course, learn your scales as far as heart rate is concerned, using the Carbonin formula of 220 minus your age to get your maximum heart rate, and then use the formula of a 60 to 80% and of your maximum heart rate puts you in a cardiovascular range. If you're towards the high end of that a lot, that's a warning sign. That's more of an anaerobic state, and you find yourself in an anaerobic state when you're doing some simple exercises that you know, like running on a treadmill or walking or any kind of cardiovascular exercise that you know, hey, I can handle this pace. I've always been able to handle this pace. But if it's jacking your heart rate up into an anaerobic state, that could be a warning sign. When you're wearing a mask, it could be a warning sign. So it's something to watch out for. But even better than that, because unless you've been tracking your heart rate and know that, when I run at 120 beats per minute, all of a sudden I'm running at 140. You may or may not have that baseline information. But what everybody does is they always have a rate of perceived exertion, what we call an RPE scale. And you can have a rate of perceived exertion scale of 1 to 10 on how you feel. 1 being no big deal, I can do this for days, I feel like I'm laying on a couch, all the way up to 10, I should have quit a while ago, and they may be calling an ambulance for me. Anything over 5 or 6, I would be a little bit concerned with. I'd be a little concerned, especially if you find yourself in a 5 to 6 range with an exercise that you've done on a regular basis and never had trouble with. RPE and being honest with yourself about your RPE scale is extremely important. You may want to Google that, but rate of perceived exertion scale, you can use that same scale to judge whether you operate typically in a 4 to 5 range, and now you're finding yourself in a 7 to 9 range doing the exact same exercises with a mask. And so that's another good way of measuring whether or not you're in any kind of a danger level as far as a mask is concerned. Now, we're still waiting for all the studies to come out. I'm sure in subsequent years, we're going to have quite a bit of data come out about training with a mask. And the reason being is because we've got such a fantastic, fertile ground for doing studies right now. But also, I don't feel that this will be the last time that we have to don a mask. I do believe that Garrett Williamson personally believes that, of course, COVID is going to be behind us at some point in time. But there may be something else that comes up that we may have to wear a mask for. And so I'm sure that there's going to be plenty of studies that come out about that. But I felt it necessary to touch on it right now because it was such a drastic change. It was such a drastic change that all of us, or most of us, were required to wear a mask. And the majority of the exercise public, if they were going to work out in a gym, were required to wear a mask during exercise. So I thought it best for us to at least touch on this subject and review what we know now as the warning signs or potential dangers in wearing a mask. Here at Personal Edge Fitness, we've been able to successfully train throughout this pandemic. We have several different modalities that we use, several different areas that we use for training, both in the facility, outside of the facility, at people's homes, and where we're able, and online, of course, where we're able to limit exposure and really keep everyone in a controlled, safe situation. If we can help you in putting together your program or helping you make the right decisions for working out safely, please don't hesitate to contact me at Garrett@personaledgefitness.com. That is our website too. Check us out at personaledgefitness.com, on our Facebook page, Personal Edge Fitness, or give us a call, either our Mobile location at 251-341-0927 or our Eastern Shore location at 251-651-0927. I want everybody to keep exercising out there. I want everybody to stay safe. I don't want this pandemic to interrupt anybody from finding their own level of wellness. Thank you for joining me. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.